Well, if you saw on Facebook, I had shared that one humorous joke. At least I hope you saw the humor in it anyway. But a couple more as we think on Valentine's and our loved ones, our spouses maybe. There's one here that says, Archie Campbell enjoyed telling about a friend of his, Joe White, who was in a car accident and had to be taken to the hospital. His wife stayed outside until the doctor came out. The doctor said, Mrs. White, I don't like the looks of your husband. She said, I don't either, but he's good to the kids. And this one kind of gets a little closer to home. It says that at a 3-day retreat for pastors and their wives, one session consisted of testimonies about how the Lord has blessed our lives and ministries. One young preacher's wife stood up and began nervously, the Bible promises, no good thing does the Lord withhold from them that walk uprightly. Well, she said sincerely, my husband is one of those no good things. I don't think she interpreted that correctly, but it's okay. We need to laugh. We have to laugh. Helps things. Helps our marriages. Helps our friendships. And I think even as we are discussing the great antithesis, these 6 things, and as we talked about the 3 of them last week, they apply to the marriage also, I believe. Of course, the first one, now, I'm sure none of us want to murder our spouse, but to go further, not to be angry. Doesn't mean we aren't going to have our disagreements, but we have to be careful of that, our anger. And then the other 2, which I discussed, adultery and divorce, and those, of course, we know directly apply, and we can easily apply them to the marriage, to our loved ones. And as we continue on and look at the next 3, again, they can be applied. And again, the underlying theme of this all, hopefully you come to understand, is love. And that is the basis of it, is love. Love for each other. And so as we look at this next one, in Matthew chapter 5, we're going to start with verse 33, Matthew chapter 5. And he talks about telling the truth. And he says, again, you have heard that it was said to our ancestors, you must not break your oath, but you must keep your oaths to the Lord. But I tell you, don't take an oath at all, either by heaven, because it is God's throne, or by earth, because it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, because it is the city of the great king. Neither should you swear by your head, because you cannot make a single hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no, no. Anything more than this is from the evil one. So we have to tell the truth. Of course, we know the 10th commandment. Again, we went over that already. Do not lie. Do not bear false witness against thy neighbor. But we have to understand this also, why Jesus said this. And why he went on to say what he did. Because the Pharisees found a loophole. They knew that if they could swear, if they swore by everything or anything but God, then if they didn't follow through, if they changed their mind, if they weren't sincere, well, that's okay. They didn't swear by God. And of course, here we see where Jesus calls them on it, calls them out, points that out. That we shouldn't even do any of that. We must tell the truth. Our yes should be yes and our no, no. And we, those of us here, have to set the example. And we have to set the example to others. We have to be honest. We have to be dependable. To the stranger and to each other. Especially to each other. Because a lot of times that stranger is watching what we're doing. And if he sees we are not dependable with even our family and our friends, They're not going to rely on us at all. We may not even be able to, we won't be able to reach them. As that is what we are all called to do, to testify to others. We have to be dependable. Husbands, when we tell our wife yes, we know it better be yes. Because if we tell them yes and we don't follow through, well, it might be a little uncomfortable in the home. There's a series of movies, the old Ma and Pa Kettle. And I thought, well, we don't want to be like Pa Kettle. You know, remember, if you've seen those, if you remember, if you know his famous line, when something didn't get done, when Ma Kettle thought it was supposed to, he'd say, well, I was going to get to it one of these days. We can't have that attitude. I don't know. Obviously, Ma Kettle loved him a lot because she put up with it through however many kids they had. Or yes be yes. Not, I'll get to it one of these days. And I'm talking to myself. I'm good at that. I'll get to it one of these days. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Keep that in mind. And then to go along with this is the next one. Go the second mile. And we see that in verses 38 through 42. And it says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, don't resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if anyone slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. As for the one who wants to sue you and take away your shirt, let him have your coat as well, or tunic and cloak. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to the one who asks you, and don't turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. And go the second mile. We cannot return evil for evil. And that is what, of course, was taught in the Old Testament. But again, it was not meant in excess. It was meant as a deterrent. But sometimes, and more often than not, we do just the opposite. We want retribution. Usually we want more than what was done to us. And if we are to have true love in our hearts, we have to forgive and go above and beyond what is expected of us. We are to go above and beyond what the world expects of us. And let's look at the examples that we're given here. He talks about a tooth for a tooth. We talked about that. And Jesus goes on to tell them quite the opposite. If you get slapped in the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And hopefully what you gain out of this is it was an insult. In that time, to be slapped, usually it was with the back of the hand across the right cheek. That was an insult. So Jesus is saying, even though you are being insulted in the worst way possible, turn the other cheek. Be kind to them. Now here, you want the other side? I guess it might even it out anyway. Might be red or might be red on both sides. Turn the other cheek. And then he talks about, again, brings up going to court. If one wants to sue you, those versions say, take your tunic. If you understand that, that was their innermost garment. And again, it was an insult. Mean-spirited to sue to the point of taking the shirt off your back, the t-shirt off your back. But Jesus says if they're going to do that, give them your cloak, your coat. And for them to give them their cloak, that was their coat, that was their blanket at night. That's what they used. It was essential to their survival. Jesus is telling them, if they're going to sue you for this, give them that. And we probably think of times where people have taken stuff from us, or whether forcefully or just borrowed or whatever. And maybe we need to go the extra mile. Maybe help them with what they're doing. That way, of course, we'll get back what they borrowed if we help them. But go above and beyond. Give the one who asks you, and don't turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Again, we are to be examples of Christ. And again, we are to do this even in our marriages and in our friendships. Sometimes we're more stingy with our friends and our loved ones than we are with others. Probably because we know them better than we do others. We know what their tendencies are. So we have to make that extra effort to go above and beyond. And we should go above and beyond for our spouse, for our children, for our loved ones. And then the last one here. Probably a reason why it was saved for last. Love your enemies. In verses 43 through 47, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward will you have? Don't even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing out of the ordinary? Don't even the Gentiles do the same? I want to take us back up to that first verse. He says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. And if you were to study that, you realize that God didn't say hate your enemy. He may have been displeased with some of the actions of people, of the enemies of the Israelites. A lot of times it was their decision that caused them to come to an end. But God never said in there, hate your enemy. He said, love your neighbor. And of course we know it was asked, who is your neighbor? And as I asked the kids, well, we just look around here, we can see who our neighbor is, who should be our neighbor. Think about it where you live. Who is your neighbor? Who should be your neighbor? So we are never to hate our enemy. And in fact, I think there's 3 things we should do toward our enemy. First, we should speak well of them. And that can be hard to do. We see it all over the TV now. People don't speak well of each other. If we did away with that, there'd be a big difference just by that alone. Speak well. It may be easy to criticize, to gossip, and in fact you end up hurting them by telling other things to other people. Whether it may not even, more likely it's not true, usually it's not. By the time it gets passed on through, it's definitely nothing what was started out in the beginning. So speak well. Do well. Do things for them, as we talked about just previously. And in Proverbs 25, chapter 25, verses 21 through 22 gives us some information, something to think about here. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. And if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Feed your enemy. Take care of your enemy. Obviously, he talks about heaping coals, but I think also we can take since we're talking about opposites, the opposite of that. You are a good influence upon them. You help them. And a lot of times they will turn and they will understand that, well, I wasn't too kind to that person, and they return to my unkindness with kindness. A lot of times you see an attitude change. I talked about dealing with customers at Tractor Supply. A lot of times that's what I had to do. Be kind to them. Even if they were using words I didn't care to hear. But hopefully, and more often than not, by the time they were leaving, their attitude had changed. So do well. And then pray well. Pray for them. Jesus did that. I talked about that last week. Jesus did that on the cross. Prayed for his enemies. That God would forgive them. But they didn't know what they were doing. Pray for them. Even if they did slap you across the right cheek. That's probably the best time to pray for them, because that's probably when you need to pray the most. Because Satan's going to try to get you to retaliate. Pray well. There's a story that I want to share with you, and I want to just read it. And it helps emphasize this point I'm trying to make. And it's from a situation from World War II. And Mitsuo Fuchida, commander of the Japanese Air Force, led the squadron of 860 planes that attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. And now after that, an American bomber, Jacob de Chazer, was eager to strike back, and the following April 18th, he flew his B-25 bomber, titled The Bat Out of Hell, on a dangerous raid over Japan. After dropping his bombs on Nagoya, de Chazer lost his way in a heavy fog and ejected as his plane ran out of fuel. He was taken prisoner, tortured by the Japanese, and threatened with imminent death. For almost 2 years, de Chazer suffered hunger, cold, and dysentery. In May of 1944, he was given a Bible. "You can keep it for 3 weeks," said the guard. De Chazer grabbed it, clutched it to his chest, and started reading in Genesis. Scarcely sleeping, he read the Bible through several times, memorizing key passages. On June 8th, after reading to Romans 10:9, Jacob prayed to receive Jesus Christ as his Savior. Immediately, Matthew 5:44 became a critical text for de Chazer, as he determined to treat his Japanese guards differently. His hostility toward them evaporated, and every morning he greeted them warmly. He prayed for them and sought to witness to them. He noticed their attitude toward him also changed. They would often slip him food or supplies. After the war, de Chazer returned to Japan as a missionary. Copies of his testimony, "I was a prisoner of the Japanese," flooded the country, and thousands wanted to see the man who could love and forgive his enemies. De Chazer settled down to establish a church in Nagoya, the city he had bombed. One man in particular, deeply affected by de Chazer's testimony, was led to Christ by Glenn Wagner of the Pocket Testament League. Shortly afterward, the man paid a visit to Jacob de Chazer at his home, and the two became dear friend and brothers. It was Mitsuo Fuchida who had led the attack at Pearl Harbor. As de Chazer served as missionary in Japan, Fuchida became a powerful evangelist, preaching throughout Japan and around the world. So a man that caused such destruction was led to Christ because of a decision of another man not to hate his enemy, but to love them, even in the face of imprisonment, torture. He still loved them and prayed for them. Hard for us to do, hard for us to imagine, I'm sure. But we are to love our enemy. the doctor does in an abortion, but we cannot hate the doctor as a person. We can hate the act of the terrorist, but we cannot hate the terrorist as a person God created in His image. We can hate and disagree with the acts of the far left or far right, depending on which side you're on. But we cannot hate the person. May not agree with them. More often than not, we don't. And what I see, especially in this last week, is an extreme on each end. From each person, from each group of people. We have to love. We have to love our enemy. We have to love that neighbor we don't agree with. Love that neighbor that hasn't returned the tools that they borrowed 15 years ago. And then we have to apply it, of course, with our spouse and our loved ones. And at times, yes, you may think they're the enemy. I hope not. But sometimes we have disagreements. They may feel that way, but they are not. And instead, we should stop and immediately love them. Pray for them. Sometimes we have to take the upper hand. Sometimes we have to humble ourselves and seek forgiveness from our spouse, from our loved one. So they may feel like it, they may feel like your enemy, but I assure you they are not. More likely, something I did, something I said. Opened my mouth before I thought. And in this last verse, we'll finish with it. It says, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." Perfect in this Greek means mature. Mature. Again, we see a lot of the opposite of that. We are to be mature. But yet our love can be perfect. We can have the perfect love. We can achieve that. Jesus was an example of that here on earth. Perfect love. We can achieve the holy life. Dwight L. Moody says the serene beauty of a holy life is the most powerful influence in the world, next to the might of God. Our example, our holy example, our example of love is such a great example, such a great influence. But we have to make that decision, to make that choice. So I'll close. Love is a noun and a verb. Love as a noun is pretty easy to do. It's pretty easy for us to even sit here in the church, in our pews, and say, yes, I love that person, that person. I can love that person. I can love that liberal. But then we have to do it as a verb, an action verb. That is a little more difficult. To put love into action. To actually go and express your love to that person. To that group of people. Love in action is hard. But we have to do it, and we should do it. And we are called as followers of Jesus to love, to put it to action. If we don't, we are not fulfilling the Great Commission and what we are each called to do. And so it is my prayer that you all see what is important. And that is that we love each other. We may not agree. In fact, it's okay to disagree. Kind of keeps everybody in check to disagree, but we still love each other. And we have to express that. And again, testify to it. So what I thought we'd close with, the closing song, if Warren would come back up, and probably most of us know this by heart, at least the first verse. Then you have the children's song, Jesus Loves Me, and it'll be on the screen. Well, let's sing that. Let us stand together and